welcome everyone to Pine Tree News. I am joined by my good friend Nate. And Nate, I don't know how to pronounce your last name. I got to ask you.
Omahksistaamik is the Blackfoot pronunciation. Big Buffalo Bull or Big Bull is the way that it's been.
Right, Big Bull, of course. Yes, that's how I know you. I knew there was a disconnect in how I saw your name on Facebook there. So I'm talking with Nate Big Bull. We know each other from helping build a solar farm in southern Alberta near Claire's home there. And we're going to talk about some environmentalism. We're going to talk about some, the large-scale environmental problems and the kind of the small-scale environmental problems, right? So the big things, probably can't control the carbon in the atmosphere, but you can control, what kind of food you eat. You can grow a garden. So, and especially, Nate, as you probably tell by his last name's Big Bull. He's First Nations, and he's kind of got some unique opinions on First Nation sovereignty, oil and gas. It's not exactly the cookie cutter official narrative that you subscribe to. So just, I'd like you to enlighten me a bit about, first let's just talk about gardens. So do you or your family live on the reserves?
Yes, we do. I grew up on the reserve most of my life. We moved back from the States. My dad's a welder, and we lived in the States for probably until I was about 5 years old. I was born in the States, and then we moved around quite a bit, and then we moved back to the reserve when I was about 5-6 years old, somewhere in there, 1985. And yeah, I pretty much lived here. My family lived here. We've grown up around here pretty much most of my life until I moved away in adulthood. But yeah, I've been raised around the reserve most of my life.
Cool. And what's the agricultural bent vibe over there in the reserve? Is there a lot of people growing their own vegetables, or is it a mostly grocery store, or what's it like? What was it like for you personally, let's say first?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much, we've pretty much adopted the common narrative, I guess you want to call it, here anyway. I mean, I do know of some people who have, vegetables. I know of people who've gotten, their own gardens, and it's a very niche market. Like, there's a lot of people who are pretty much, like when I grew up, we went to the store, we got, our beef. I do have some farmer friends, ranchers who we will get beef from. Hutterites are up the road, so if you want, some fresh vegetables and stuff, we can go over there and get some carrot, things like carrots, potatoes, things like that. I do know that there are some, like the neighboring reserve has a potato farm. They grow their own potatoes. There are some, but as far as a major garden, like we don't really have that here. Even though we do live in an agriculture community, like there's farming all around us, mostly canola, wheat, and barley. But as far as it's being utilized for personal use, it's not very much here.
Right. Cool. Good to know. So, yeah, as I kind of say, like economically, it's not exactly advantageous all the time. Some people say it's like, I spent $40 in 6 months to save $1.50 on tomatoes. Of course, the way things are going with the economy right now and the inflation, it's starting to look more economically advantageous to start growing your own vegetables.
Definitely, yeah. I think we're entering that point in time where the options we are becoming fewer and fewer and fewer, and we're going to have to start looking at other resources for sure. The way the world is changing, the cost of goods, with this inflation or supposed inflation thing. I mean, there's so many factors in the world today. We're finding that I think are going to push people more into that direction of where they're going to have to make those choices for personally exploring other sources of food, because it's just too ridiculous now. I mean, it's not to the point where we can't, but there's the average person. If you have a family and you have a family of 2, 3 kids, 4 kids. My brother's got 3 kids, and even that, I mean, it's you have to you have to budget a lot more. You have to be more conscious about how you spend your money. I have no children, so I mean, I'm a little bit more frivolous, I guess, than most people. My fiance is in the same boat. Like, she's got a 20-year-old daughter, and she's on her own. So between the two of us, we kind of do enjoy things maybe a little bit more than most people do, I would say. Not than everybody, but we definitely, even between the two of us, can see how it's becoming more and more. The options are becoming fewer and fewer, and it's becoming more and more. You have to make those conscious choices. You can't just spend and spend and spend, and it's definitely getting you got to watch those sort of things more and more now.
Yeah,
for sure.
we took a trip to Costco the other day. I couldn't believe it. Mind you, we got a couple like high ticket items. We got like a big roast, like big 80-pound roast or $80 roast kind of thing. But just one shopping cart full of stuff, 400 big ones. Couldn't believe it. Yeah, it's just going up and up.
Too, yeah, for sure. You definitely don't bring out what $400 used to bring out of the grocery store.
Not
we used to go to the co-op here in Pincher Creek. My mom would go shopping for, groceries for the week or whatever for us kids, which is kind of the way growing up we were kind of were. She'd kind of go stock up, and then she had supper planned for the week and lunches for our schooling and stuff. And you used to go in there and you might spend $300, but you would come out with enough groceries for everybody for the week, and you could stretch it out, and then we still would sometimes go out go to the city on a Friday or Saturday, and we go have a family go to movies and stuff like that. And there was still room for that sort of thing. Yeah, it's definitely changed.
Mm. Yeah, what was I gonna say? The groceries. Oh yeah. So my girlfriend and I, we kind of have different scarcity mentalities around food. So for me, if I see a fridge full of food, right, because I spent so many years in the kitchen, I'm like, oh my goodness. My mind goes, oh, how am I going to use up all this food, right? I pray all this food doesn't go to waste, right? But if the fridge is like near empty, I'm like, cool, I just got to use these couple things, and then we used all the food. That's my economics in my mind as far as a win. But for her, if she doesn't see that thing like chock full of food, then she's like, oh, we're going to starve, So we kind of always have to battle about whether we have too much or not enough food. She always wants to go to the grocery store, and I always want to hold off.
Right. And I was raised with that minimalist mentality too, where you just had to bear what you need. You don't have excess. Yeah. Even though we were raised, like I said, we had 5 kids, and then my parents, so there were 7 in my family, and we kind of had to plan ahead a little bit more that way. But I mean, I just always saw it as being that even being thrifty. You know what I mean? And now that I've gotten older, my mentality, and my dad's the same way now, where he lives alone, just him by himself. But, not having a bunch of excess food in my cupboard that I know that's going to go to waste, I think about those. I'm a little more conscious of those now, as opposed to people who just have all unnecessary stuff. Like I have a sister, and she kind of likes to have a bunch of stuff at her disposal, and some of it does go to waste, a lot of stuff, So it's, I do have that mentality though myself personally, about just having what you need. If you need something, go to the store when you need it. Otherwise, if you don't, it's just going to go to waste.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that kind of covers the small scale of the environment, your little local ecology. But as far as the large scale of the environment, like what do you feel about climate change? Let's stay specifically the CO2 directly tied to the temperature. What do you think about that?
Oh, the climate's definitely changing, but it has been changing for the last 60,000 years, so it's not like it's anything new. And they say that, the emissions that we give off here in North America, for example, are minuscule compared to a country like India or China, where there's over 1 billion people in each of those countries, in between the two of them. Where Canada, our population is about 43, 44 million. The United States, it's 400 million, I think, in the States. And even at that carbon footprint that they say that we are giving off the emissions, it's relatively minute. I believe that there are a lot of other factors to this, as far as like what's causing the climate to change. It's not just man-made. Like it's not just from a personal use. When you start getting into, and this is where you might lose some people, but I've always been of the mindset of like, do your own research first. And my mentality, and from what I've seen, that there's a lot of exterior factors going into why the climate's changing the way that it is at such a rapid rate. Like we start getting into cloud seeding, and they've already acknowledged that cloud seeding is a real thing, weather modification. Right. They've been doing it since, and you start getting into these factors, which we do not address enough mainstream. Like coming down from Calgary yesterday, I was driving south to my reserve, and you could see the lines in the sky where it's like a grid. And if you all you got to do is look up to notice these aren't normal clouds. I was in Europe last summer. I was in Switzerland and going over top of the Alps, and the air. And when I was in Europe, like I had never seen the air, at least here in years, that clear, where you could see the sky. It was blue. It was bright, Wow. And then I come here, constant fog, this haze. They're blocking out the sun here. And I do believe that there are exterior factors that are causing why we're in this boat that we're in. It's not just from driving your vehicle every day, but they do say that one of the biggest footprints you can leave behind is having a child. That's how.
Yeah, fair enough.
It is. They've done measuring, and they actually say that one of the biggest carbon footprints a human can leave is having a child. I mean, and that's not to say that
it's a very anti-human agenda, It's very unidimensional in one perspective, right? It's such a, like you're saying, there's so many variables, but this narrative like boils it down to this one simple variable, just very unidimensional, and says, oh, everything is your fault because you breathe and fart and have kids. I know a lot of people that don't want to have kids because they've kind of bought in hook, line, and sinker into this climate change narrative, and they think that they're bad people if they reproduce. And I think that's just such a tragedy. Like having little people around in any capacity is it's a great part of the human experience. It would suck that people have to miss out on that just because they believe that having a kid is bad for the environment, broadly speaking.
Then you start getting into like the whole, like if you look at like what China did with the one-child policy, and like the impact that they're saying, that the ripple effect that it's had now, it's not just there. But like when you start looking at these last 2 years about what that's going to mean, the ripple effect from and I won't go too much into the whole COVID thing, but I will say that there are going to be ripple effects that are being utilized, and I do believe are utilized to at least, if nothing, limit the population growth. And they're already showing now that teen and young people infertility is a very big factor now, that it's at an all-time low, that it has never been this low before, where they're finding like high levels of infertility in young people and in male and female, and that we're actually in a negative growth rate right now, which we have not seen.
Right.
So what that's going to do to our population, to our future as as people, as a society, is definitely going in not in a very good way. It's definitely, I think we have yet to see what the full impact of it is going to be. Like, we're just in the tip of it right now, but in coming years it'll become more and more evident about why they want to limit these things, why they want to control like how many kids you can have. And it all falls into this narrative of them saying, well, it's caused by children, like we're talking about having kids, and why it's a bad thing. They're making it almost like to be this boogeyman, which is not at all. You look around us here, and I'm sitting here looking out at the prairie, and there's wide open spaces, and there's farmland. There's no food shortage that I can see here. There's no lack of resources. We're not running out of timber. I got herds of cattle. We got thousands of heads of cattle over here. I mean, there's enough food to feed everybody. There's not like we're lacking on resources. It's not like we're sitting on top of each other. Like, you look at some of the cities in China, where I believe that they say the population of China, 1.3 or 1.4 billion, is condensed into about 12 cities. So when you look at those, how they live, it's crazy to, it's crazy to, but we're not living in that. We don't, and we don't. I don't think that we are. If you look at the narrative and you look at, like, it doesn't go hand in hand, is what I'm getting at. I guess that's what I'm kind of saying, is that what they're spinning about food shortage, and we need to do our part, and everybody knows. You hear the government ads, everybody knows climate change is an issue. I don't know anybody here who's talking about climate change being an issue, to be honest with you.
Right. Did you hear recently the Public Health Minister of Canada, Theresa Tam, released this report saying that climate change and a handful of other things are the cause of bad health in Canada?
Yeah. And they just throw these things out there, like day in, day out. We're bombarded with these outrageous claims, and they present them like they're fact. They'll tell you this in the news, like, this is the facts, this is the way that it is. And it's all based on the poll of about 50 people in one region, and how many of them are, government employees, We don't know, the full details. All we do is what people see, and it's on the surface. And with the, government-controlled media, like, they just came out with the Twitter thing there you probably saw about how CBC is 59% government funded. You know what I mean? Like, that speaks for itself.
Oh, yeah. I saw this. I saw this funny report on, I think it was the True North Center who shared it. I think it's on one of my Pine Tree News accounts, but they show this graph where CBC is trying to show how much is government funded, and how much is revenue and whatnot. And the way they built their graph, they've got the first part and it's a normal gradient, right? Here's our revenue. And then it shows government funding, and they're going like 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000.
Yeah.
And then they get to like the government funding, it jumps from like 6,000 to like 16,000 or something like that, right? Yeah. And they just condensed, they just, there's my buddy on the last show, he said this thing, he says, numbers don't lie, but liars use numbers. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I'm of the opinion of, this is where, like, I was maybe coming from the environment that I come from, being a native person. I mean, I would expect, more people to be a lot more skeptical of the government's agenda, when it comes to given our history with the government. And I'm definitely raised in that believe none of what you hear and half of what you see mentality, because that's just how I was raised, and I question everything. So when I start hearing, numbers and them throwing these outrageous things around, I have to really start digging deep and questioning, okay, what's the source of this? Like, where does this come from? One of the things I had recently heard about the inflation was that the government was actually blocking from Stats Canada the documents for inflation from the last 20 years because so they didn't have a basis for comparison. Like, these agencies who were trying to access that information for the inflation rates and growth rates on domestic product and stuff, that the government was actually saying that they couldn't access them, that they weren't available. And how does that exist, in an age of technology where everything's supposed to be open to the public and we can see, where we're at compared to how it used to be?
Yeah. Unless
you were back there taking pictures of every little thing you bought and you were tallying up and you had your receipts from 1999, 2000, still, you don't have a basic. Most of us, all it's just exists in our memory. I remember when a chocolate bar, you could walk in and it was 88 cents now, 89 cents. And then now you walk in the same chocolate bar is like $2.89. Almost $3 for the same chocolate bar, and it's smaller. But it only exists in my memory. Who do I compare that to? Like, who do I go and say, oh, look,
it's like the Mandela effect of inflation.
Exactly, absolutely. So was it really 89 cents? And then I've heard this analogy where they talk about how, like, over time, when you start to eliminate the evidence, it becomes more of like it starts venturing more into the realm of like myth. It's mythical then.
Right. So, okay. So yes, this is another topic I kind of wanted to touch on with you because
I just got to ask you, bro. I'm just going to pay for my fuel here. So just if you want to pause it.
Yeah, no worries.
Let's give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
Sounds good. So what were we talking about? We're talking about the Mandela effect of prices and stuff, and how if you can hide the historical information, then you can just rewrite history to whatever you want it to be.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and this has probably been happening for however long, right? They say we only know like less than a plank length of history because, half of history gets deleted after every victory of a war, right? Because the winner gets to write the story. And I argued with my friend about this, about how, hereditary teachings and storytelling is actually probably closer to the truth than our official history books, because, even if you're playing a game of telephone between generations, it's probably closer to the truth than, the powers that be, especially now that we have TV that's usurped our traditional, storytelling. The native people have been passing down these stories from generation to generation. So do you have any nuggets of wisdom, any stories that you know of that kind of conflict with the official narrative that we're told from, the powers that be?
Honestly, like, because we have such an oral history, it's the same problem that we run into now, because a lot of our stories that have been passed down really came from a time after contact. And a lot of what, like our traditional history, we didn't have a written history. So a lot of that was passed down from, parent to their children or grandparents to their grandchildren, and such and such. And because of that, there was a lot of things that were lost for, like, open for interpretation, but were also lost because it was a same thing. It was like a big game of telephone. But also, when you're dealing with people, you always have that factor of there being that risk or the chance of it being your own viewpoint, right? That might have been your viewpoint, but somebody else living in the village across the prairie might not have seen it the same way, kind of a thing. Right. So because we didn't have that documentation, it's very hard to draw those conclusions about what things really were like, actually. There are some paintings you can go back to, like Charlie M. Russell was a very huge influence on painting what life was like at that time when he was around in Montana amongst the Plains tribes in the mid 1800s, right? And then you can go back to some of the writings of Prince Maximilian, who came and lived amongst the Plains tribes in the early 1800s, and he kind of documented what he saw life like amongst the tribes here. But as far as our own personal accounts, like it's very, very minimal. Like what's available, we have what we call a winter count, which would have taken place. They say that it took place in the late 1700s is when it kind of started. It's a set of drawings is what it is. And all it does is it details a specific outline of events that had happened. But as far as being like accurate day to day, it's all been passed down. And that's part of the thing we're talking about how things can get manipulated or change over time. It's a very clear indication of that.
Right. So what you're saying is even the oral historians are susceptible to, say, power games or their own personal bias kind of thing.
Right. That's exactly like what you're saying, is that it's always open to. Sorry, I'm just getting my keys here.
Yeah, no worries.
You know, you're going to find, like what we're talking about, it's going to be very much dependent on the person you talk to. Because even in today's society, I mean, a lot of people's thoughts are determined by, well, their environment, like what part of the country they're living in, you know, what their upbringing look like, what their social circles look like. And because of that, it's good to get a different perspective on these things, like different opinions for that very reason. Because it's going to vary from, like, even my experience. Like, if you were to talk to my brother Will, he'd probably give you a very similar account of like our upbringing up to a point. But once you go out on your own and become an adult, you start. That's where your experience or your perception starts to really change about what the world looks like, you know. And that's for everybody. So it's not as clear cut as saying, well, this is the way that it is. And I don't think anybody should have that kind of power. Nobody should be able to say that this is the way that it is, you know, because
and that's what happened. That's what happened during COVID. You and I kind of met each other halfway through COVID, but I don't think the vaccination campaign rollout had really taken full swing by the time we parted ways.
No. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the next year I started going to college. I don't know what happened to you, if you had any fallout from that, but I'll tell you my personal account. So I met my girlfriend, and you know, things were going great. I think I met her in April, which is when I got laid off. It was kind of a funny thing. So I come into town, you know, I come into Lethbridge every once in a while because I was living in Claire's home there. And,
right.
I come into town, been trying to meet up with her for probably like a month, and finally decided to show up, and, you know, she invites me over, I meet up with her, and I think I stayed over like the first couple nights, and then I go back into the site in Claire's home there, and got laid off. I was like, sweet. We're going to hang out with this lady friend. And then skip ahead to the whole vaccination campaign. We're both in college. She's upgrading. I'm going to business school. And, you know, we're all masked up and yada, yada. And then, now we got the, restrictions exemption program.
Yeah.
And I wanted to keep going to college, you know, and I didn't like the idea of getting poked in the nose, you know, on a bi-weekly basis. So yeah, I got the vaccine, and I've regretted it ever since. I should have just dropped out of college right then and there. Yeah, that's kind of where I have a bit of resentment towards the whole situation that happened there because of that.
Oh man, no stories like that about people who've had similar experiences. You're not alone on that one, that's for sure. And that's like, sorry, I don't put you off. I'm going to elaborate on that point before we move on, because it's so easy to go off on so many variables about this. I will just say that in the recent months, from my personal experiences, I've heard many stories like that, not just from one, but I'm talking about like more than a handful. Like we're talking a dozen or more, and that's just on my own personal level of a similar experience. So yeah, my condolences to you, man. Like that's terrible.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, this is where my mind, like, she's pregnant again, right? We're having a baby, 8 months along, everything's going great. But what grinds my gears about the medical industry and their pseudo-scientific perspective on things is that there was, when they're trying to push a medication on you, there's like, oh, there's no evidence that it's bad for you, right?
Right.
No evidence, right? So in this case, no evidence is an indicator that it's good, right?
Yeah.
And then we're asking her about, some people say that pineapple will help induce labor, right? She's like, there's no evidence for that. So now evidence is a negative indicator. And it's just really funny how they pick and choose how, no evidence here. Mind you, with the vaccine, if there was no evidence because nobody was fucking looking. Also, Pfizer buried some of the data. There was 130 pregnant women and 30 of them actually gave birth, kind of thing.
Absolutely. I have my own personal experience, like my COVID, the Delta, after I left the job site, and I didn't get the vaccines at all. I didn't get the shots, and I went out and I was out and about, and I was in Montana, and my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, he had been sick with a really bad, what they thought was a really bad cold for about 2 days before I got there. And then me and him were kind of hanging out, and I picked it up from him, I'm sure, because he was coughing and he had you could hear it in his throat and stuff, and he was sweating and stuff like that and getting kind of sick, but he didn't get the shots either. So after I got back from the States and I was here, I actually tested positive the day that I got back. So I went into kind of isolate myself away from people, all that sort of stuff, and it lasted longer than it was supposed to. It wasn't the worst. I'll say this right off the bat. It was not the worst experience I've ever had as far as being sick. There were some things about it that were a little bit different, but I was I'm 41 years old at the time, and I was in the demographic where I should have got really, really sick, but I didn't. I recovered, fine. But I did have a doctor who I saw because I had this terrible headache, and it just would not go away. I couldn't sleep. I almost never slept for almost 3 days. It's the first time I'd ever had insomnia. I won't go into that now, but it was a very scary ordeal. That was the worst part of it, was not being able to sleep. I kept waking up, and almost to the point where I was hallucinating. It was kind of scary. So I went to get something to help me sleep, and I don't use these words lightly, but it was a miracle that I had this conversation with a nurse who came in, and she started giving me this big spiel about why aren't you vaccinated, and all you people are the ones who are causing all this. And I got into it with me. Right, I'm going to argue this point. Right? So this conversation in the waiting room. And this doctor, a young doctor, he overheard the conversation, and he's the one that was coming to. He was the resident doctor for the emergency. So he comes in, and he's kind of hush hush about it, but he's like, I see you're a very open-minded young man. He said, I'd like to have a conversation with you about some things. He said, if you're open to it, he says, and he starts going on. He said, I said, I've been treating COVID patients for almost 2 years now. He said, I've never seen this much hypocrisy in the medical industry as I'm seeing right now. He said, I can get fired lose my doctor's license for telling you this. He says, but there are treatments that are being censored by the medical industry. And he said, I've seen them firsthand, where I've tried to bring my findings to the medical board and they won't even look at them. He said, I've never seen a time like this before, where you have absolute evidence that you're trying to bring forward, and they will ignore the whole thing. They will not even address it. But he said one of the things that he knows works is ivermectin. So he prescribed ivermectin to me, the horse dewormer. No, I'm not talking about over-the-counter. He's like, if you can get your hands on some of the stuff that says ivermectin, it's pure ivermectin. He gave me the whole breakdown about what ivermectin is, how it helps, the history behind it. And I will tell you this for the record, that the stuff that you buy that says ivermectin, that's for an animal, called dewormer, is actually the exact same chemical compound and makeup of the stuff that they're selling for $130 for 3 pills over the counter. It's the same stuff. I went and got it. I took it for 3 days, and that was great. I'm sitting here telling you,